In this unit, we're going to look at equity in the context of our energy landscape. This is Unit 2, Equity Defined. So this can be a new topic for some people, so it's important to start with a lot of context to illustrate why equity in the energy landscape is an important issue that deserves our attention. After completing this unit, you should be able to interpret the role of historical inequities in shaping the modern energy landscape in the United States. You should be able to critically evaluate common approaches to differentiating between equity and equality. You should be able to identify examples of environmental injustice and explain why community engagement is crucial to shaping a clean energy future, and explain how governments and utility companies could advance energy equity. Let's start with the foundational concept of environmental justice so we can start to think about energy justice. Environmental justice is a principle that all people and communities have the right to equal protection and equal enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. So you might think, okay, this is obvious. Who wouldn't agree that everyone deserves equal protection and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations? Well, the fact is, laws and regulations often favor some people and communities over others, which by definition results in various injustices. Dr. Robert Bullard is considered the father of environmental justice because his work, starting in the early 1990s, really laid the foundation for the modern environmental justice movement. Dr. Bullard is a distinguished scholar, author, and activist whose work exposed how environmental policies disproportionately negatively impact communities of color. There's a link to the Bullard Center for Environmental Justice in the course overview. Understanding the role of historical and ongoing inequities in creating the modern energy landscape in the U.S. can give us the context we need to push for energy solutions that serve us all. The history of slavery in the U.S. is deeply intertwined with our country's economic development and consequently our energy systems. Enslaved Africans were forced to provide the labor for the cultivation of energy-intensive crops like tobacco, rice, and cotton, and these crops were essential to developing the economy. They required significant human energy to plant, harvest, and process. The wealth generated by enslaved people contributed significantly to the growth of industry and infrastructure in the United States, in addition to enriching slave-owning families. The exploitation of enslaved labor made it possible for the U.S. to shift from an agrarian system, or one based on agriculture, to industrialization, or the system based on manufacturing that we have today. The legacy of slavery has had lasting effects on social and economic disparities, which continue to influence energy access and consumption patterns across the country. For example, Black communities and other marginalized communities often face greater challenges accessing affordable and sustainable energy. This is because intergenerational wealth and poverty in the U.S. are directly linked to our racist colonial history. One example of a policy that has had lasting effects is redlining. Redlining was a practice in the 1930s related to mortgage lending in the U.S. Essentially, banks were encouraged by the federal government to deny loans to residents in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods, and these areas were outlined in red on maps. So the people who lived in the redlined areas were denied once-in-a-generation opportunities to build wealth. And lasting effects of redlining can be seen in the power grid because resources and infrastructure tend to go to areas where more wealth has been accumulated over generations. Indigenous communities in the U.S. and around the world also experience dramatic impacts from energy development. Indigenous lands are often used for extraction of fossil fuels and other energy resources without proper consultation or consent. This is not just some historical fact, it continues today, and involves mining for coal, oil, uranium, lithium, cobalt, and other minerals. This mining leads to significant environmental degradation and health issues. Indigenous communities often bear the brunt of environmental pollution from energy projects. Despite contributing to regional energy production, which directly increases national energy security, many Indigenous communities don't have reliable access to electricity. For example, some homes on reservations still rely on expensive and polluting generators. Traditionally, mainstream messages about environmental conservation have focused on saving the planet, which doesn't make much sense because the planet has been here long before humans and will be here long after we're gone. What needs saving is us. And to do that, we need to replace systems and structures that degrade and damage the planet and communities with systems and structures that support us all. Early in the environmental movement, there was a lot of attention on polar bears as somewhat of a mascot for the cause. And don't get me wrong, biodiversity is crucial for maintaining healthy ecosystems and life on the planet. But what mainstream Western society tends to forget is that humans are part of the living planet. We're not separate from it. Mainstream capitalist society, so dominant society, has nurtured this mindset that people need to be in control of the planet, that we're separate from the earth and we need to dominate it. This is so prevalent in our language even, which informs our thoughts. Just think about how we talk about living systems as resources or capital. It's this mental separation that has allowed us to exploit not only our shared home, but each other. When people view each other as different from themselves, it becomes easier to justify exploiting them. And exploitation is what has gotten us here. Exploitation of the planet and people go hand in hand, so they can't really be separated. Before the Industrial Revolution, which is our baseline for global temperature rise resulting from the burning of fossil fuels and degrading natural capital, increasing the output of goods was made possible by the labor of enslaved people. As we've seen, there are many undeniable connections between industrialization, extraction, and exploitation. This continues to be the case in many instances with exploitation of lax or non-existent labor laws and pollution laws in nations around the world. And, as is the case in the US, by exploiting the labor of people who are incarcerated. So not surprisingly, these are primarily Black and brown people who never had access to the privileges that many other members of our communities enjoy. Injustice is built into today's systems and structures, and the energy system is no exception. As we've seen, redlining helped shape the power grid because funding and infrastructure follows the money. So formerly redlined neighborhoods suffer from under-resourced electrical services, more frequent power outages, and more shutoffs for non-payment and high energy bills. Understanding these impacts highlights the importance of developing inclusive and respectful energy policies that recognize the rights and needs of Indigenous, Black, brown, and low-income communities who've been pushed to the margin of energy policy decisions. Unfortunately, there are plenty of examples of energy injustice locally and across the globe. For example, here in San Diego, in part because of the legacy of redlining, Black, brown, low-income, and new immigrant communities tend to live in neighborhoods that have less green space than other neighborhoods. Because such a large proportion of these neighborhoods is made up of concrete buildings and roads, they're much warmer than surrounding areas. This is called the urban heat island effect, and it results in communities of concern having to work harder to stay cool and having more heat-related illnesses and even death. Here we see a more than 14-degree difference in air temperature between a tree-lined street and one without trees. The temperature on the ground in the area without trees is almost 22 degrees hotter than the area with trees. Why might the urban heat island effect be considered an environmental justice issue? Low-income and other marginalized communities are often in areas with less green space and more heat-absorbing surfaces, which make them more vulnerable to heat and heat-related illness. As heat-related deaths continue to rise in the US and around the world, this is a poignant example of environmental injustice. Some other connections between energy and injustice include inadequate funding for infrastructure and maintenance in communities of concern. We saw this really clearly in the floods of January 24, where flooding in San Diego disproportionately impacted communities whose storm drain maintenance have been neglected. Also, there's a much higher prevalence of asthma, particularly among kids, in communities that are exposed to traffic-related air pollution. So here's a map of San Diego County showing the asthma hospitalization rates. We can see the hospitalizations due to asthma are occurring in the areas where there's a high concentration of large roadways. Traffic pollutes the air because most vehicles are still powered by petroleum. And polluting industry and roads are generally diverted away from high-income communities into communities that are seen as having less political power to push back. For too long, these communities have been considered sacrifice zones and disproportionately saddled with pollution and waste. So all of this is important to understand so we can repair injustices when pushing for cleaner energy and better energy policies. And many organizations and municipalities involved in the transition to clean energy rightfully identify justice as a really central part of the work. However, some of them are unintentionally using models that actually perpetuate structural harms. So you may have seen images that attempt to distinguish between the concepts of equity and equality. Here are several examples that pop up with a simple internet search. To make it easier to see if you're watching this on your phone, here are two images that I see most often. So what's one thing these pictures have in common? The one thing they have in common is the people are different heights. And this implies the main problem is the people or groups of people. It implies that some people are not as tall or capable as other people, and therefore they need help. The portrayal of people being different heights perpetuates the false notion that those who've been subjected to generations of racism, pollution, and ongoing injustices are somehow less complete, or in this case, smaller than others. I challenge this idea as being deeply problematic and rooted in systems of oppression. The problem here is not the people, it's not communities or communities who lack access to opportunity. The problem is the environment that makes access easier for some and more difficult for others. So what would these pictures look like if they didn't show individual differences as a source of a problem? Instead of opportunity or access being out of reach or obscured because of an individual deficiency, it's more appropriate to show people of the same height or size in holes of different depths. The holes represent structural barriers to opportunity, so those environmental factors that favor some groups over others. I think the set of illustrations presented by Tony Ruth in the 2019 Design and Tech report provide the best visualization of these concepts without showing individual deficiencies as a source of structural inequities. Here we see inequality as unequal access to opportunity. The structure of the tree is benefiting one of the little guys over the other. In the equality frame, we see the resources, in this case ladders and bags, evenly distributed. But the structure of the tree still benefits the little guy on the left. In the equity frame, both of the little guys have tools that give them equal access, but the tree is still leaning toward the little guy on the left, giving him access to more apples. In the justice frame, we see the structural inequity has been addressed. Both of the little guys can use the same tools and access the same number of apples because the main problem, which is the structure of the tree, has been fixed. So anytime you see images showing differences of a group of people as the root of a problem, I encourage you to speak up and challenge it. Okay, so let's talk more about how structural inequities manifest in our energy system. One of the most obvious ways is the business models of companies responsible for procuring energy and getting it to customers. Our focus in this course is California and San Diego more specifically, but if you're watching this from somewhere else in the country or the world, you can easily find this information for your region by doing a simple internet search. There are many different types of organizations that are involved in the process required to get energy to households and businesses. An important term to know is Load Serving Entity, or LSE. LSEs manage and distribute electricity to customers within a specific service area. So they can be utilities, power marketers, or other authorized entities providing energy services. The different kinds of LSEs in California include IOUs, or investor-owned utilities, POUs, which are publicly owned utilities, cooperatives, or co-ops, CCAs, community choice aggregators, and electric service providers. Let's start with IOUs. As the name implies, IOUs are for-profit businesses. Some of the IOUs in California are Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric, SDG&E. IOUs are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, or CPUC, which oversees their rates, services, and operations. IOUs generally have large customer bases, and they tend to serve densely populated areas. As for-profit businesses, they're legally obligated to prioritize profit, and they're actually pretty good at it. For example, SDG&E reported profits of $891 million in 2024, which was down $45 million from 2023. So in 2024, SDG&E profited almost $2.5 million every single day. All this money comes from ratepayers, and that's you and me. PG&E, another investor-owned utility, reported profits of $2.48 billion in 2024. Publicly owned utilities are owned and operated by government entities like municipalities, states, or political subdivisions. Unlike IOUs, POUs are not-for-profit organizations. Examples of POUs include the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. POUs are regulated by local government bodies, not the CPUC, which means they often have more flexibility in setting rates and policies that are tailored to local needs. Co-ops are member-owned utilities, and they also operate on a not-for-profit basis. Co-op members are both customers and owners, so they have a say in the utility's operations. Co-ops are regulated by their members and local boards rather than the CPUC. They focus on providing services at cost to their members. And co-ops tend to exist in rural or less densely populated areas. So where you live determines the business model of your LSE, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. If your energy comes from an IOU, you can join other community members in pushing back against organizations that prioritize profit over providing affordable energy. There's a group called Public Power San Diego, and their website is publicpowersd.org. And what they want to do is replace SDG&E with a public utility. You can go to their website and sign up for their newsletter and support their efforts if you are interested in being part of that movement. Another great local organization is a climate action campaign. Their website is climateactioncampaign.org. They've been really successful lately in meeting with local represented officials to educate them on the issues related to the current energy system and convincing them to vote on upcoming legislation in favor of lowering energy bills and really taking on monopoly utilities. The other organization I want to tell you about is San Diego 350. Their website is sandiego350.org. They have a lot of different teams and campaigns, including a policy team. So if you're interested in shaping policy directly, joining their policy team is a really good way of doing that. If you're in a different area, I suggest researching local groups who are leading the efforts for democratization of energy and supporting their efforts. There are other players in the energy market. An electric service provider, or ESP, is a non-utility entity that offers direct access electric service to customers in a service territory of an investor-owned utility. So ESPs are required to register with the California Public Utilities Commission. CCAs are local government entities that procure or buy cleaner electricity on behalf of residents and businesses. They work with IOUs to use their transmission and distribution infrastructure to deliver electricity. CCAs give ratepayers the option of using renewable energy, so you can choose to go 100% renewable or opt into a different package. But CCAs give that decision to you, the ratepayer, which is a really good thing. What's one way local governments could promote energy equity? They could support legislation to prioritize affordable, clean energy over profit for utility companies. This would help ensure all communities, especially low-income ones, have access to clean, affordable energy. There's a difference between the rate you pay for energy and your overall electric bill. The rate is the amount you pay per kilowatt hour, and it changes based on the time of day that you're using it. Utilities charge more during certain times of day when there's a lot of demand to try to get people to use less during that time. In addition to the rate or fee per kilowatt hour, your bill includes a lot of fees. So I thought I'd show you one of my recent bills as an example. And I encourage you to look at one of your bills to see what your generation rate is and compare it to all the other fees on your bill. So for context, I live in a 600 square foot condo. We don't use a lot of energy compared to, for example, a family with kids living in a bigger home. Also, this bill doesn't show our gas use because that's managed by our homeowners association. So the building still uses gas for heating our water, but you won't see that on this bill. Most homes in San Diego actually still use gas for heating water and cooking. And by the way, studies have shown that gas stoves were attributable to 13% of childhood asthma cases in the US. Okay, on to my bill. During this billing cycle, we used 172 kilowatt hours. That's shown on a different page, so it's not actually shown here. According to the University of San Diego's Quality of Life dashboard, the average annual electricity use of households in San Diego was 6,375 kilowatt hours in 2020. That's about 530 kilowatt hours per month. So you can see my usage of 172 is not representative of all San Diegans. On the bottom of the bill, you can see the total I paid was $75. Just above that, you can see the cost of generating the electricity I used was less than $16. The rest of the bill is transmission, distribution, and other fees. The electricity I used is about 20% of my bill, and fees make up around 80%. Again, San Diego Gas and Electric is a for-profit investor-owned utility, and I think it'd be really interesting to see the energy bills from residents throughout California and see differences related to the business model of their utility. If you're curious about how your rates compare to other California residents, I encourage you to go to the CPUC rates comparison tool, which is in the course overview document. The information in this bar graph comes from SMUD, which is Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, and they're a publicly owned utility serving the Sacramento area. It's comparing average monthly residential bill using 750 kilowatt hours per month. So as we just discussed, the average electricity use in San Diego homes is 530 kilowatt hours, which is lower than the 750 shown here. Even though we in San Diego have the highest energy rates in the country, thanks to our mild climate, energy use in San Diego is relatively low, especially in comparison to other parts of the country, like New England, for example. As you can see, residents paying Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric tend to have the highest bills. What do the utilities highlighted in yellow have in common? Not surprisingly, the utilities whose customers pay the most are the investor-owned for-profit utilities. Rocky Mountain Institute, or RMI, does a lot of fantastic research, and I recommend following them on social media if you're interested in keeping up with energy trends. In a recent post, they concisely summarize the factors that contribute to rising residential electricity costs. First, money going into transmission and distribution has increased and will continue to increase. Transmission is basically the long-distance route electricity takes from a generating site, like a power plant, to an electrical substation. The wiring from the high-voltage substation to homes and businesses is called distribution. So transmission infrastructure is the huge circuits and lines, and distribution infrastructure is the power lines and poles in your neighborhood, for example. RMI research shows that the grid, or all of this infrastructure together, is expanding. Some would argue that utilities who charge ratepayers for transmission and distribution don't really have any incentives for encouraging rooftop solar, because that would mean there's no need to move electricity because it would be coming straight to the end user by way of sunlight. Second, about 85% of energy in the marketplace comes from non-renewable fossil fuels, for now. And those prices are very unstable. The graph shows just how unpredictable fossil gas prices have been. Third, and this is related to climate change, extreme weather has significantly driven up costs. Billion-dollar weather and climate disasters are becoming more and more frequent, and recovery from all of these events costs a lot of money. Lastly, as we know, the utilities that have to generate revenue for their shareholders will choose to increase, not decrease their footprint. Like access to clean air, clean water, and nutritious food, many consider access to affordable energy a basic human right. Unless communities challenge the status quo or the current situation, not much is going to change. In San Diego and elsewhere, the lowest income residents pay the highest proportion of their income on energy. Energy burden is the percent of a household's median annual income that's used to pay for electricity and gas bills. This information comes from the City of San Diego's Climate Equity Index, and it illustrates the cost of energy as a percentage of income. So the darker the color, the higher the proportion of the community's income is spent on energy. So what is energy burden or energy cost burden? Right, it's the percentage of a household's income that's used to pay for electricity and gas. A high energy burden means a large proportion of income goes towards energy, which can be especially hard for low-income households. When we layer communities of concern over the energy burden map, we can see a clear correlation. The communities with the lowest access to opportunity, including green space and cooling tree canopies, are those paying the highest proportion of their income on energy costs. If we take the historic redlining map, it looks a lot like the current map showing the communities with the highest energy burden. And that's not a coincidence. How have social inequities influenced the distribution of energy infrastructure and access in the United States? Social inequities, including systemic racism and economic disparities, have led to unequal access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy. Marginalized communities often experience higher energy costs relative to income. They tend to live near polluting energy facilities and are less likely to benefit from clean energy investments. SDG&E does have programs for their customers who have difficulty paying, and links to those programs are in the course overview. There are, of course, other ways structural inequities manifest in our energy system. Another example is a generally high cost of installing distributed energy resources. Distributed energy resources are small-scale power generation or storage technologies like solar panels or batteries. They're located close to where the electricity is used, which allows for decentralized or off-grid energy production and consumption. So think of a home with solar panels and a battery that's generating energy right where it's being used. Installing solar panels requires a significant upfront investment, which can be a barrier for low-income households. Also, those who can afford to get solar benefit from net energy metering, which is a billing mechanism that allows customers who generate their own electricity, typically through solar panels, to send excess energy back to the grid and receive credits on their utility bills. This helps balance the energy produced and consumed, especially when renewable sources like solar and wind are involved. As a result of the upfront cost of solar, wealthier households are more likely to benefit from net energy metering, while lower income households may not have the financial means to participate. So utilities might argue that net energy metering leads to cost shifting, where non-solar customers end up subsidizing the grid maintenance costs for solar customers. They argue this can result in higher electricity rates for those who can't afford solar installations. Others would argue that for-profit utilities don't want us getting energy from the sun or wind because they want us to keep buying energy from them so they can keep expanding the grid and charging us for transmission and distribution, plus a bunch of other fees. Also, historical disinvestment in certain communities can mean that the infrastructure needed to support distributed generation like solar panels is lacking. For example, there are great programs out there like those offered by Grid Alternatives and others, and they install solar panels in low-income neighborhoods. But sometimes the roofs on homes can't support the panels and need to be replaced first. So this can make it so a household who qualifies for free solar can't benefit from the service. So we've been talking about residential or home energy burden. Let's transition now to transportation. And when we talk about energy, we have to make sure transportation is included in the conversation. After all, how we move ourselves and our stuff around requires a lot of energy, and at least for now, it contributes significantly to environmental problems. Especially here in Southern California, where we're so dependent on cars, the economic and environmental costs of transportation are huge. According to the Center for Neighborhood Technology, transportation costs are considered affordable if they're 15% or less of a household's income. In San Diego, estimated driving cost per household is $1,207 per month. So if you live in San Diego, you'd have to have a household income of around $100,000 for your transportation costs to be considered affordable. And gas is just one component of transportation costs. Think about paying for your car, paying for insurance, maintenance, registration, parking, not to mention the anguish of sitting in traffic and the risk you take on our dangerous roads. When you add it all up, public transit looks more and more appealing. So as we've seen, there are many, many ways historical and ongoing inequities have shaped the current energy landscape in the U.S. So what can we do about it? There's actually a lot that individuals, governments, businesses, including utilities, can do to speed up a transition to clean energy while making sure everyone can participate and benefit from it. So you may have heard the term just transition. The concept of a just transition has been defined by the International Labor Organization as greening the economy in a way that is as fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. The just transition emphasizes the need for policies and practices that support job creation, social justice, and environmental sustainability. All good things. Our current energy system is not going to shift on its own because those who benefit the most from it have a lot of political power. However, it's not impossible to change it. Research has shown that when just 3.5% of a population actively supports a shift, that shift is basically inevitable. A BBC article with more details on this is in the course overview. So why is community engagement crucial to shaping a clean energy future? The more of us who are involved in advocating for a clean energy future, the better the chances that policies will be equitable, culturally relevant, and meet our needs. To move to a clean energy economy in a just and equitable way, we need to advocate for the change that we demand. So what does advocacy actually look like? Well, it can look like a lot of different things. Advocacy starts with becoming informed on the issues, and you're doing that now. It looks like making sure your views are known at public hearings, so attend those boring council meetings and submit your comments related to items you care about. Make sure you know your elected representatives' views on topics you care about, and make sure they know yours. So there are apps like Climate Action Now and 5Calls that make contacting your representative really easy, and links to both of those are in the course resources. Contribute time and money to candidates who support your views. Vote. Vote with your vote and vote with your money. All of the big harmful corporations only exist because they have customers. Run for office. And I'm serious. You can run for office and you should run for office. There are so many amazing organizations in San Diego and around the world who are pushing for change. And all of these organizations are made up of people who care deeply about these issues and are taking action collectively to move us in the right direction. It's more effective to work with others, and it's a lot more enjoyable. Finally, support reform of election campaign financing that reduces undue influence by corporations and wealthy individuals. We need an economy that works for all of us, so all of us need to push for it. Finally, it's more rewarding and better for your physical and mental health to always operate from a place of love. As professor, philosopher, author, and activist Dr. Cornel West puts it, justice is what love looks like in public. Okay, in Unit 2, we covered how the current energy landscape has been shaped by historical and ongoing social injustices. We discussed the exploitation of enslaved labor, the extraction of energy resources on indigenous land, the ongoing impacts of redlining on the current energy grid, and this was just scratching the surface of these issues. We looked at some models used to illustrate the concepts of equity and equality, and were able to identify why they might be more harmful than helpful. We talked about a few examples of environmental injustice, including the urban heat island effect, underinvestment in low-income communities, and some of the issues with the high upfront cost of installing residential solar systems. We defined the just transition to a clean energy future and ways we, as individuals, can push for an energy system that's fair and inclusive. And we looked at different business models of utilities to start to think about ways they can be changed to reduce inequities.